The history of the United States is a long and steady unfolding of human settlement, ambition, conflict, and routine progress that stretches from the first footsteps of early peoples to the complex modern society that now covers the continent. Long before any European ship crossed the Atlantic Ocean, countless generations of Native American peoples lived in the vast lands that would become the United States. They built cultures suited to forests, plains, deserts, and mountains, hunting, farming, and trading in systems that lasted for thousands of years. Tribes such as the Iroquois, Cherokee, Sioux, and Navajo developed languages, traditions, and alliances that shaped regions long before any map carried the name America. Life moved in rhythm with the seasons, wars were fought, peace was made, and generations passed without the thought of distant continents. Then, in the late 15th and early 16th centuries, European exploration began to edge westward, slowly bringing new people to the shores of the Americas. The Spanish explored the southern parts, the French moved through Canada and down the Mississippi, and the English found their way to the Atlantic coast. When English colonists landed at Jamestown in 1607, they began a small and uncertain settlement that struggled through famine, disease, and uneasy relations with native peoples. Over time, more colonies were planted along the coast, and what began as small wooden outposts grew into towns, then into small cities. The Pilgrims who arrived in 1620 sought religious freedom and founded Plymouth Colony, setting patterns that would echo through centuries of American thought. The mix of idealism and hardship, faith and commerce, independence and conformity. The colonies developed separately, but were linked by trade and shared language. They were not yet a nation, but they were becoming something distinct from the Europe that had sent them. In New England, Puritan communities lived by strict religious rules, while in the South, large plantations grew tobacco and rice using enslaved labor brought from Africa. Between them stretched the middle colonies, diverse in people and tolerant in spirit, trading goods and ideas across the Atlantic. As the 18th century unfolded, these 13 colonies became increasingly self-sufficient, with local assemblies, printing presses, and merchants who grew wealthy on commerce. Yet they were still bound to Britain, paying taxes, obeying royal governors, and fighting in British wars. Over time, tensions grew between the colonies and the crown. Taxes without representation, limits on trade, and the sense that the colonies were treated as children by a distant power stirred resentment. Pamphlets were written, protests organized, and tempers rose. The Boston Massacre in 1770 and the Boston Tea Party in 1773 symbolized this growing defiance. By 1775, open conflict had begun. The battles of Lexington and Concord marked the start of the American Revolution. Farmers, merchants, and craftsmen took up arms, and the Continental Congress declared independence in 1776. The Declaration, drafted by Thomas Jefferson, proclaimed that all men are created equal and endowed with unalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The words were bold and idealistic, but the reality of the war was long and uncertain. The British Army was disciplined and powerful, while the Americans were poorly supplied and often divided. Yet through endurance, leadership, and French support, the colonies eventually prevailed. The surrender of Cornwallis at Yorktown in 1781 signaled victory, and the Treaty of Paris in 1783 recognized the independence of the United States of America. The young nation faced the challenge of creating a government from scratch. The Articles of Confederation, the first attempt, proved weak. States acted independently, and the national government could not raise money or enforce laws effectively. Out of this confusion came the Constitutional Convention of 1787, where delegates debated how to balance liberty with order. The result was the United States Constitution, a document that established a federal system, separated powers, and provided mechanisms for amendment. It was ratified in 1788, and George Washington became the first president in 1789. The new government began cautiously, defining its powers while avoiding the appearance of monarchy. Washington set precedents in office, serving 2 terms and refusing a third. His farewell address warned against political parties and foreign entanglements, advice soon forgotten. Under his leadership and that of subsequent presidents, the nation began to grow. The Bill of Rights guaranteed freedoms of speech, religion, and press. Economic debates arose between Alexander Hamilton, who favored strong federal power and industry, and Thomas Jefferson, who envisioned an agrarian republic of small farmers. These differences formed the first political parties, the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans. In 1803, under President Jefferson, the Louisiana Purchase doubled the nation's size, acquiring vast lands from France. Exploration followed, most famously the Lewis and Clark expedition, which charted rivers and mountains from the Mississippi to the Pacific. The idea of expansion took hold, manifest destiny, the belief that America was destined to span the continent. Yet, as settlers moved westward, they displaced native peoples, signed treaties that were broken, and waged wars that erased ancient homelands. The early 19th century brought both progress and division. The War of 1812 reaffirmed independence against Britain, but revealed deep regional tensions. Industrialization began in the North with factories, canals, and railroads, while the South remained dependent on slavery and agriculture. The Missouri Compromise of 1820 sought to balance free and slave states, but it only postponed the conflict that would come. Andrew Jackson's presidency marked a new democratic era for white men, but also the forced removal of Native Americans along the Trail of Tears. Immigration increased, cities grew, and reform movements emerged. Temperance, abolition, women's rights, all driven by a restless energy for improvement. The 1840s brought war with Mexico, adding vast territories in the West and reigniting debates over slavery. Gold was discovered in California in 1848, sending thousands across the continent in search of fortune. But the nation was divided. The Compromise of 1850 and the Kansas-Nebraska Act failed to calm tensions, and violence erupted in bleeding Kansas. The Dred Scott decision denied citizenship to African Americans, and in 1860, the election of Abraham Lincoln led Southern states to secede, forming the Confederacy. In 1861, the Civil War began, the deadliest conflict in American history. It was fought not only over the preservation of the Union, but over the future of slavery. Battles raged from Bull Run to Gettysburg, from Shiloh to Appomattox. Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation in 1863 turned the war into a fight for freedom as well as unity. After 4 years, the Union prevailed and slavery was abolished by the 13th Amendment. Lincoln did not live to see the peace he envisioned. He was assassinated in 1865. The Reconstruction era that followed tried to rebuild the South and integrate freed slaves into society, but resistance was fierce. New laws granted rights, but new systems of oppression arose. Black codes, Jim Crow laws, and racial violence. The promise of equality faded as federal troops withdrew in 1877. The late 19th century brought industrial might. Railroads stretched coast to coast, steel and oil industries boomed, and cities swelled with immigrants seeking opportunity. The Gilded Age was marked by wealth and corruption, invention and inequality. Labor unions formed, strikes erupted, and reformers called for change. America turned outward too, claiming territories after the Spanish-American War of 1898 and emerging as a global power. The new century opened with progressivism, the movement to clean up politics and improve social conditions. Presidents like Teddy Roosevelt broke up monopolies, conserved forests, and expanded America's influence abroad. World War I drew the United States into global conflict, sending soldiers to Europe in 1917 to fight for democracy. The war ended in 1918, leaving the nation weary but powerful. The 1920s brought prosperity, automobiles, jazz, and the illusion of endless growth. But in 1929, the stock market crashed, and the Great Depression began. Unemployment soared, banks failed, and despair spread. Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal sought to restore hope with public works,